We hear all the time that correlation is not causation, but we don't always talk about the reason that's true. What is it that gets in the way and prevents us from drawing cause and effect conclusions? So that's what we're going to talk about in this video, the problem of confounding. So in this example, we're looking at an article called Frequency of Colds Dramatically Cut with Regular Exercise. And this was based on a study that looked at a nice large sample size, over 1,000 people in a wide range of ages for 12 weeks, and asked them to record their frequency of exercise. So they treated it as just a yes or no thing. Either you work out 5 or more days a week or you don't, as well as the incidence of colds. And this was just measured as, did you have a cold in the last week, yes or no? So this article finds that exercise and colds are associated. So when we say that two things are associated, that just means that knowing the value of one variable helps to predict the other. So in this case, if we knew that people were regular exercisers, so in this definition that they work out at least 5 times a week, if we know that they are regular exercisers, we know that they are less likely to get a cold. So they would be less likely to have a cold in the last week. This is association because knowing one of these variables, whether somebody is a regular exerciser or not, gives you a little bit of information about how likely they are to have a cold. It helps you to predict whether or not they have a cold, and so the variables are associated. And when we're looking at the relationship or the association between two variables, a lot of times it helps to think of it in terms of an explanatory variable and a response. So if we think about what is the outcome that we care about, we're really interested in whether or not people get colds. That's like the outcome variable. And then what we're using to predict it is exercise. So we're using exercise to predict whether or not somebody would get a cold. So the response variable is incidence of colds, which again is being treated as categorical in this study. And the explanatory variable exercise, which is also being treated as categorical. And explanatory and response variables, they can be categorical and quantitative. It's just going to be important to think about that moving forward because that's going to determine the type of analysis that we use. So this article says that there's an association between exercise and incidence of colds, but this doesn't prove that exercise causes a decreased frequency of colds. And that's because there could be a confounding variable. So when I try to think of confounding variables, I like to draw this little diagram. So we're interested in the relationship between exercise and colds. And we're asking the question, does exercise change the probability of getting a cold? A confounder would be a third variable that's connected to each of the other two. So basically you can think about it as like an alternate path. Maybe it's not that exercise is actually related to how many colds you get. Maybe exercise is linked to some other third variable, and that third variable influences whether or not you get a cold. So you can think of this like an alternative explanation. Take a second and pause the video and try to think of an alternative explanation, a third variable that might be linking exercise and colds. So there's lots of different examples that you could come up with, examples of confounders in this case. One of those could be nutrition. So to make an argument that this is a confounder, we have to link it to both sides. We have to link it to colds and to exercise. So if I want to describe the association between exercise and diet, then I might say that people who exercise may be more likely to eat a healthy diet, right? So I'm describing the association between diet and exercise. They may be more likely to eat a healthy diet. And obviously this is just kind of speculation, but I think it's reasonable to assume that there might be an association here. And then I also need to link it to colds. So that healthy diet that the exercisers may be more likely to eat, maybe a healthy diet supports the immune system, which prevents colds. So now I have a full explanation that links these two things, right? So maybe it's that the people who are exercising are eating a healthy diet, and that in turn supports the immune system and prevents colds. So it's not that there's like a straight explanation between exercise and colds. is that they're both linked to this third thing. So if I ask you to describe confounding on a quiz, this is what I'm looking for. I want there to be an explicit description of how it's linked to the explanatory variable and how it's linked to the response variable. So you're sort of clearly drawing the alternate path of how X could lead to Y through a third variable. In other words, because they're both linked to a confounding variable.